The rain traced long, crooked lines down the cracked windshield, blurring the road ahead as Luke Carter guided his battered pickup toward the heart of Maple Hollow. The truck rattled with every bump, its tired engine groaning like an old warhorse. Ready to collapse, Luke's fingers tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles burned white. 14 years of service, and this was what he came back to know: medals in hand. No uniform on his back, no home to return to, and no family waiting at the door. He had been gone longer than he ever imagined. 14 years of sandstorms, sleepless nights, and the unrelenting chaos of battle. Out there, he had a purpose. Here, in the quiet streets of his childhood, he was just another man people whispered about when they thought he couldn't hear. The road curved past Maple Hollow Elementary. The school bell had just rung, and children poured out into the drizzle, their laughter carrying faintly through the damp air. For a moment, Luke slowed, the truck's old wipers smearing the rain into streaks, and then he saw them: Emma, with her hair catching what little light broke through the clouds, and Tommy, clutching a backpack almost as big as he was. Luke's breath caught. His chest tightened in a way battlefields never could. They were his children, yet they felt like strangers stolen by time. He pushed open the truck door, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped out into the wet gravel. Tommy spotted him first. His eyes lit up, and for a second, Luke saw the boy he had missed growing up: the first steps, the lost teeth, the birthday candles he never got to see. Tommy's small feet splashed through puddles as he ran to him. Luke bent down, wrapping his arms around his son, feeling the warmth of him, the realness of him. Emma followed more slowly. She didn't run. She didn't smile. Her deep brown eyes studied him with caution, as though trying to decide if this man was still her father or just someone who looked like him. Before Luke could say more than a quiet "Hey, sweetheart," a shadow fell over them. 2 hours, Luke, came the voice, sharp, cold. It was Claire, his ex-wife, standing under a red umbrella. Beside her was Daniel Price, the polished lawyer who had not only helped her win custody, but had also been the reason Luke was left with so little after the divorce. Daniel gave Luke a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Still driving that truck? Daniel asked lightly, his tone dripping with condescension. Guess some things never change. Luke didn't answer. He wasn't here to trade words with a man who had taken so much from him. He placed a steady hand on Emma's shoulder, the other holding Tommy close, and led them toward the small cafe across from the school, a place he remembered from his own childhood. The warm scent of coffee and cinnamon met them as they stepped inside, but the comfort it once brought felt hollow now. They sat in a quiet corner, away from curious eyes. Luke asked about school, about friends, about anything that might make the moment feel normal. But Emma kept glancing toward the window where Claire and Daniel still stood talking. Tommy spoke in short bursts before falling silent again. When the clock in the cafe struck the hour, Luke walked them back. He watched them disappear into the back seat of Daniel's spotless car, watched the red umbrella fade into the distance, until all that remained was the gray drizzle and the ache in his chest. That ache followed him as he drove to the attorney's office. The reading of his father's will had been delayed until Luke's return from the military, though part of him had wished it could wait forever. Inside the sterile conference room, his half-brother, Grant, and half-sister, Victoria, sat poised, like they belonged on magazine covers rather than in a small-town law office. Both had inherited not just their mother's wealth but her disdain for anyone who didn't fit their polished world. The lawyer, a thin man with silver hair, began reading. Grant and Victoria were given the mansion on Crest Hill, the lakefront property, and a sum of money that made Luke's head spin. Then the lawyer paused, his eyes shifting to Luke Carter. He read, "I leave full ownership of Carter and Sons Lumber Mill, located on the east outskirts of Maple Hollow. There are no other assets allotted." Grant smirked, Victoria's lips curved in a faint, satisfied smile. They didn't have to say a word. Luke could hear their thoughts. The mill was worthless. Everyone in town knew it. It had been shut down for years, the wood rotting, the roof sagging. It was a skeleton of the business his grandfather once built. As the meeting ended, Victoria brushed past him and whispered, "At least now you have something to match your life broken and falling apart." Luke stood there in the emptying room, holding the worn envelope with the deed inside. He could have walked away. He could have sold the mill for scraps and tried to start over somewhere far from the town. That pitied him. But something deep inside, something that had carried him through deserts and gunfire, told him there was more here than anyone realized. He didn't know it yet. But hidden in that crumbling lumber mill was a secret worth $99 million. A secret powerful enough to shake the foundations of everything his enemies thought they owned. And for the first time since he'd stepped off the bus into Maple Hollow, Luke felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The gravel crunched beneath Luke's boots as he stood before the towering gates of Carter and Sons lumber mill. Rust clung to the metal like old blood. The faded sign barely legible under years of neglect. The wind whistled through the broken slats of the fence, carrying with it the faint scent of damp pine and decay. It was the same gate he had walked through as a boy, holding his father's hand, listening to stories about the mill's glory. Days when every beam of wood and every shipment carried the Carter name with pride. Now it was nothing more than a carcass, abandoned and unwanted. Luke pushed the gate open. It groaned like something waking from a long, restless sleep. The yard was littered with warped planks and rusted machinery, the once smooth tracks where logs rolled into the sawmill now covered in weeds. Puddles reflected the jagged roof line, where holes let in the cold morning light. He stepped inside, his boots stirring clouds of dust. The main hall was vast and empty, the echo of his footsteps filling the space like a hollow memory. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the walls, cutting through the darkness in sharp, golden slivers. For a moment, he could almost see the men who used to work here, faces rough from years of labor, voices calling out over the whir of saws. The sound of tires crunching outside broke his thoughts. Luke turned to see a black SUV pulling up. From it stepped Frank Dalton, the town's largest building supplier, a man who had once been his father's business rival and now wore success like an expensive suit. Two other men followed, laughing, as they surveyed the property. "Well, I'll be," Frank called out, his voice carrying through the empty yard. "The prodigal son returns," to a pile of firewood. His laugh was slow and heavy, the kind of laugh meant to be heard by everyone. Luke didn't respond. "You know," Frank continued, walking toward him, "you'd be better off letting me take this place off your hands. I'll give you a fair price, enough to buy you a decent truck, maybe even a small house, somewhere you can hide from the embarrassment." Luke met his gaze. "It's not for sale." Frank's smile thinned. "Pride's a funny thing, Luke. It's not worth much when you've got nothing left." The SUV drove off, but the words lingered like a shadow. Luke explored further, checking the old offices at the back of the building. Most of the desks were overturned, the papers scattered, water damaged beyond recognition. But one room, the office that had once been his father's, was strangely untouched. The air here was different, less stale, as if the room had been sealed away from time itself. On the desk sat an old ledger, the leather cover cracked with age. He flipped it open, expecting to see standard inventory records, but instead found page after page of unfamiliar numbers and codes. In the margins, his father's handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. Words like shipment delay, confidential, and hold until cleared jumped out at him. Luke frowned. The dates didn't line up with when the mill had shut down. These entries were recent, some just months before his father's death. As he closed the book, something caught his eye, a thin gap in the wooden floorboards near the desk. He knelt down and pried at it with his knife. The board lifted to reveal a small metal box, no bigger than a lunch tin. Its lock was old but still strong. He slipped it into his backpack, his mind already racing. Whatever was inside, his father had gone to great lengths to hide it. That night, Luke sat in the dim light of his rented room above the garage of a friend who'd offered him a place to stay. The box sat on the table in front of him. He hesitated for a long moment before sliding the tip of his knife into the lock. With a quick twist, it popped open. Inside was a stack of sealed envelopes, each one marked with the Carter and Sons seal. Beneath them, wrapped in waxed paper, was something even stranger, a small brass key with a number engraved on it, 119. The first envelope he opened contained a letter addressed to him in his father's Handwriting, Luke, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. This mill is not what it seems. Keep the key safe. There are people who will do anything to find what it unlocks. Trust no one, not even family. Luke stared at the words until they blurred in his vision. Outside, the rain began again, tapping against the window like an impatient hand. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. And he had no idea that key would lead him straight into the middle of a secret, worth more than $99 million, and a danger that could destroy everything left of his family's name. Luke woke before dawn, his mind still tangled. In the words from his father's letter, trust no one, not even family. The phrase echoed like a drumbeat as he sat at the edge of the narrow bed, staring at the brass key in his palm. It was small, ordinary to anyone else, but its weight felt unnatural, like it carried more than metal. He slipped it into his jacket pocket before stepping outside. The early morning air bit at his face, thick with the scent of wet pine. Maple Hollow was just beginning to stir. Shopkeepers lifted shutters. The bakery filled the street with the smell of fresh bread, and a few early risers waved without stopping to talk. Word of his return had already spread. He could feel the curious eyes following him. From behind windows, the number engraved on the key 119 played over in his mind. Storage units, bank deposit boxes, hotel rooms. The possibilities spun like a wheel, and every spin made his pulse quicken. He started with the most obvious lead, the old Maple Hollow Bank. The building had stood for over a century, with its heavy stone facade and brass-trimmed doors. Inside, the polished floor reflected the morning light pouring through tall windows. Luke approached the counter where a middle-aged teller greeted him with a polite, rehearsed smile. "I'm here about a safe deposit box," Luke said, keeping his voice even. "Number 119, the teller typed into the computer, her expression shifting slightly as she read the screen. "One moment, sir." She disappeared into a back office, leaving Luke standing in the quiet lobby. A minute later, an older man emerged, the bank manager. His suit was pressed to perfection, his glasses gleaming, but something in his eyes sharp. Assessing made Luke's stomach tighten. "I'm afraid that box has certain restrictions," the manager said. "We'd need proof of ownership and identification from the original holder or legal documents. Granting you access." Luke placed his father's letter on the counter, along with the key. The manager read it carefully, his expression unreadable, then excused himself again. When he returned, he didn't have the key to the vault. Instead, he had Luke's father's letter folded neatly in his hand. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," he said quietly. "I can't release the contents to you at this time." Luke frowned. "Why not? My father's gone, and that key was in his possession. I'm his son." The manager hesitated before leaning in slightly. "Not all of us in this town are who we seem. If you want answers, don't come here. They'll know." Before Luke could ask what he meant, the man straightened and stepped away, calling for the next customer. Confused and frustrated, Luke left the bank. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the streets in gold, but it felt colder than before. As he approached his truck, he noticed a folded piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. The note was written in block letters, "If you want to keep breathing, stop looking for what's in box 119. Luke scanned the street. No one was watching, at least not openly. He crushed the note in his fist, the warning only hardening his resolve. That evening, he returned to the mill. The quiet there was heavy, broken only by the occasional groan of old wood settling. He set the key on the desk and stared at it under the light of a single hanging bulb. His father's letter had mentioned people who would do anything to find what it unlocked. If that was true, then whatever was inside that box wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. As he was about to leave for the night, a noise echoed from somewhere deep in the mill. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Luke froze, his hand instinctively going to the pocket where his pocket knife rested. The sound grew closer, then stopped. "Mr. Carter," a voice called out from the shadows. A figure stepped into the light, a woman, mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back and a coat still dripping from the rain. Her eyes met his, steady but urgent. "You don't know me," she said, "but I knew your father. And if you value your life, you need to open that box before they do." Luke's heart pounded. He didn't even know her name, yet her voice carried the weight of someone who had already seen too much. "What's in it?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's not what's in it, Luke. It's what it leads to." And before he could speak again, she turned toward the door, glancing over her shoulder just once. "They're already closer than you think." The echo of her footsteps faded into the night, leaving Luke alone in the hollow belly of the mill alone, with a key, a warning, and a growing sense that he was running out of time. Luke barely slept that night. Every creak of the old building above his room had him reaching for the knife on the bedside table. The woman's words played on repeat. In his mind, open the box before they do. Whoever they were, it was clear now that he wasn't just dealing with nosy townsfolk or bitter relatives. By the time the pale light of morning broke through the curtains, Luke was already dressed, the brass key warm in his pocket from where he'd been holding it all night. He drove straight to the lumber mill, coffee in one hand, his father's ledger in the other. If the bank wouldn't give him the contents of box 119, maybe the ledger would tell him where to look next. The mill was silent, but something about the stillness felt wrong. The padlock on the side entrance hung broken, its metal twisted like it had been forced open. Luke stepped inside cautiously, his boots crunching over glass. A window in the back office had been smashed, letting in the cold morning air. The desk drawers had been pulled out and dumped on the floor, papers scattered like leaves after a storm. But the one thing they hadn't taken was the ledger. It was still there, resting exactly where he'd left it, as though it had been overlooked in the rush. Luke flipped through its pages again, this time more carefully. Most of the numbers meant nothing to him: shipment records, timber measurements, old client names. But in the margins, tiny notations in his father's hand stood out. They weren't full words, just initials and odd marks. PR, S14, Cove. He pulled out a map of Maple Hollow from the bottom drawer and began comparing locations. The word cove caught his attention. There was only one cove in the area, an inlet off the lake about 20 miles north. The mill had never shipped there, at least not in Luke's memory. Before he could think it through, he heard the distant hum of an engine. Through the dusty window, a dark sedan slowed in front of the mill, idling for a moment before pulling away. He didn't recognize the driver, but the car's tinted windows told him everything he needed to know. They were watching him. Luke decided to move quickly. He grabbed the ledger, locked the office door behind him, and headed for the cove. The road wound through thick pine forest, the canopy overhead breaking the sunlight into flickering shadows. By the time he reached the lake, the air smelled of damp earth and the faint metallic tang of water. The cove was quiet, almost too quiet. A few old boats bobbed gently against the dock, their paint peeling. Luke scanned the shoreline and spotted something strange: a small storage shed tucked into the trees, half hidden by overgrowth. The door was secured by a padlock, and when he ran his fingers over it, he felt the familiar weight of possibility. He reached into his pocket and slid the brass key into the lock. It turned smoothly, like it had been waiting for him. Inside, the air was cool and dry, the faint scent of cedar lingering. Wooden crates were stacked neatly along one wall, each marked with the Carter and Sons logo. Luke pried one open, expecting to find old timber or tools, but instead, inside were stacks of sealed manila folders, each stamped with the words "Confidential," "Property Records." He pulled one out and began flipping through it. The files weren't about lumber, they were about land ownership. Dozens of plots all over the county, some under false names, others registered to shell companies. And tucked inside the last folder was a hand-drawn map marked with an X over an unregistered tract of forestland near the river. It wasn't just land if the coordinates were right. It was sitting directly above the largest undeveloped deposit of rare hardwood in the state, worth millions. Luke's pulse pounded in his ears. His father hadn't been clinging to a dying business, he'd been quietly buying and hiding the rights to a fortune. And now Luke knew exactly why the woman had said they were closing in. As he stepped outside, the distant crunch of tires on gravel made him freeze. The black sedan was back, creeping along the lakeside road. Luke didn't wait to see who got out. He ducked into the trees, clutching the map and the ledger tight to his chest. Somewhere behind him, a car door slammed, followed by voices he didn't recognize. They were here, and they weren't going to knock next time. Asterisk. Luke stayed low in the undergrowth, his breathing slow and controlled, every muscle wired tight. The sedan's doors opened one by one, and 3 figures stepped out, 2 men in dark jackets and a woman with a camera slung around her neck. They didn't look like locals. Their steps were deliberate, their eyes scanning the shoreline as if they knew exactly what they were searching for. One of the men bent down near the shed door, running his hand over the lock Luke had just opened. He muttered something to the others, and the woman began snapping photos of the crates inside. Luke eased back through the brush, careful not to crack a twig beneath his boots. He moved until the voices faded, then circled wide to reach the old logging road that cut back toward town. The map was still in his hand, its edges damp from his grip. He knew he couldn't keep it in plain sight, not if strangers were already this close. By the time he reached the mill, his plan was already forming. Inside, he pulled out a set of dusty storage bins from under his father's desk. In the bottom of one, under a stack of invoices from years past, he found an old coffee tin. He slipped the map and the ledger inside, sealing it shut before tucking it into the hollow of the wall behind a loose panel. He barely had time to step back when the mill's front door swung open. Luke, it was Tyler Graves, an old friend from high school who now ran a small hardware shop in town. His broad smile was familiar, but his sudden appearance made Luke's guard rise. "Didn't think I'd find you here," Tyler said, stepping inside. "Heard you inherited this place. Figured I'd stop by, see if you needed anything, tools, supplies, whatever." Luke forced a small nod. "I'm fine for now." Tyler's eyes scanned the room, lingering a bit too long on the back office door. "Looks about the same as when your dad ran it. Shame what happened to him." The words were casual, but something in his tone felt rehearsed, almost probing. They talked for a few more minutes, Tyler asking questions about Luke's plans for the mill. When Luke kept his answers vague, Tyler eventually left, but not before glancing back at the building as he climbed into his truck. That night, Luke's unease only deepened. He went over the files in his mind, the land deeds, the map, the confidential markings. If he was right, his father had managed to acquire control over a rare hardwood reserve that, if logged or sold to the right buyers, could bring in upwards of $99 million. It wasn't just a fortune, it was leverage, the kind that could topple people with far more power than anyone in Maple Hollow. The next morning, Luke's suspicion about Tyler proved justified. He arrived at the mill to find fresh tire tracks in the dirt lot, smaller than those from the black sedan. Inside, the back office was disturbed again. The coffee tin was gone. Panic surged through him, but it was sharp and clear, not paralyzing. He didn't have time to chase Tyler down without risking more eyes on him. If the wrong people got that map, it was over. But he remembered something: his father's old hunting cabin, tucked miles into the forest. A place so secluded even most of the family didn't know it existed. Luke drove for nearly an hour, the road narrowing until it became nothing more than a dirt path swallowed by trees. The cabin was weathered, but still standing, its windows boarded, its door locked with a chain. Inside, dust covered every surface, but it was dry and secure. He could regroup here, plan his next move. As he set down his pack, a sound broke the quiet, a faint buzzing from the corner. An old landline phone sat on a shelf, the kind no one used anymore, yet it was ringing. He lifted the receiver slowly. "You're running out of time," a voice said. It was low, urgent, and unfamiliar. "If you want the truth, go to the river bridge at midnight. Come alone." The line went dead. Luke stood there, the empty static still humming in his ear. Midnight was hours away, but already he felt the tension coil inside him. Whoever called knew about the danger, maybe even about the fortune. It could be a trap, or it could be the only chance he'd get to find out exactly why his father had spent years hiding the most valuable secret in the county. Either way, Luke knew he'd be there. The forest road to the river bridge was darker than Luke remembered. The moon hid behind a thick veil of clouds, and the only sound was the steady crunch of his boots on the gravel. He had left his truck half a mile back, not wanting the rumble of the engine to announce his arrival. The brass key was in his pocket, warm from his palm, and the weight of his father's letter still pressed against his chest. The bridge came into view slowly, a narrow span of weathered steel, stretching over the slow-moving river. A single lantern hung from the railing, swaying slightly in the wind. Standing in its glow was a figure wrapped in a heavy coat, hood drawn low. Luke approached carefully, stopping just out of reach. "You came," the voice said. It was the woman from the mill, the one who had warned him before. She glanced over her shoulder before speaking again. "We don't have much time. They're watching both of us." Luke kept his voice low. "Who are they?" "People who would rather see your father's work buried forever," she said. "Your father wasn't just running a lumber mill, Luke. He was building a shield. Every piece of land he bought, every record he hid, it was to keep a much larger company from stripping this place bare." Luke frowned. "And the 99 million? That's the value of the hardwood reserve. But it's not just about the money. The forest your father protected is sitting on old mineral rights worth just as much. He was trying to buy enough land to stop them from gaining control of it." She reached into her coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. When she handed it to him, Luke unwrapped it to find another ledger, this one newer, cleaner, with pages marked in his father's meticulous handwriting. "This is the complete list of everything he owned," she said. "The deeds, the mineral rights, the buyers he was working with. With this, you can prove ownership in court. Without it, they'll take everything." Before Luke could respond, a sharp beam of light cut through the darkness. Headlights approached, fast, tires grinding on the gravel. The woman's eyes widened. "Go," she hissed. "Take the ledger and run. I'll slow them down." Luke hesitated, but she shoved him hard toward the far end of the bridge. Behind him, voices shouted, the sound of car doors slamming echoing across the water. He didn't look back. He tore through the tree line, the cold air burning in his lungs. The forest closed around him, swallowing the glow of the bridge lantern. His only focus was to keep moving, to put as much distance between himself and whoever was chasing. It felt like hours before he reached the hunting cabin again. Inside, he lit a single lantern and spread the new ledger beside the old one, to fit together perfectly, filling in gaps and linking every coded note his father had written. One thing became clear. His father had already transferred ownership of the hardwood reserve into Luke's name before he died. The document was signed, notarized, and hidden deep within the mill's foundation, disguised as part of the original building plans. That was the final piece of proof he needed. By dawn, Luke was at the mill, prying up the section of flooring his father's notes had pointed to. Inside a waterproof case lay the deed, official, binding, and undeniable. He tucked it into his jacket and drove straight to the county courthouse. The legal process took hours, but by the end of the day, the record was official. Luke Carter was the sole owner of the most valuable tract of land in the county. With both timber and mineral rights secured, word spread faster than he expected. The same people who had mocked him now watched in stunned silence as the news broke. Frank Dalton didn't laugh when they crossed paths in town. He just looked away. Grant and Victoria stopped calling altogether. Even Tyler's shop closed its doors quietly the next week. Luke didn't care about their silence. He didn't care about the fortune's number or the headlines. What mattered was what came next. He restored the mill not to sell off the forest, but to honor his father's vision. Locals found work again, and for the first time in years, Maple Hollow's economy began to rise. The land remained untouched, protected under Luke's name, just as his father had intended. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Luke stood at the edge of the schoolyard, watching Emma and Tommy run across the grass. When they spotted him, their faces lit up, not with caution or distance, but with the kind of warmth he thought he'd lost forever. As they ran toward him, Luke felt the weight of the past lift. His father's secret had changed everything, not because of the money, but because it had given him something he thought he'd never have again, a future worth protecting. And this time, he wasn't going to lose it.